Hello and welcome to the Mobile Accessible Games interview series. I'm your host, Aaron Spelker. Mobile Accessible Games is a group that is dedicated to all things about mobile accessible gaming. And through our interview series, we interview game developers as well as accessibility influencers about the state of accessible gaming. And this week we have a great guest. We have Amir Rajan from the creator and developer of A Dark Room. Amir, welcome to the interview series.
Happy to be here. And just as a aside, the game was actually a web-based game built by someone named Michael Townsend,
Mhm.
and I partnered with him and collaborated with him to do kind of re-envision the game on iOS and Android and Nintendo Switch and all the other things. So I can't take full credit for the game and what it's about, but it, just wanted to throw that out there that it was a collaboration between us.
Sure. So, tell me how did that collaboration start? So Michael creates the web-based version of the game. How do you get in contact with him to then port it to mobile devices?
Oh, it's actually pretty crazy. I got really burned out with corporate development around 2013,
Hmm.
and just kind of quit and said I'm gonna take a sabbatical. Sold like all my worldly possessions. I had basically a backpack with my laptop in there and a few other knickknacks, and that's what I considered my stuff.
Okay.
And during that time, that sabbatical, I came across the web-based version of Darkroom. I was like, I've done video. I've always aspired to do game development. That's why I got into programming, and I just emailed him and I was like, hey, I'm quit my job, taking a sabbatical. I want to kind of learn iOS development and mobile development, get my feet wet with that. Can I port your game over? If it makes something, then we'll split the we'll split the profits.
Mhm.
And he said, yeah, sure, go for it. And we've never met in person, so
Oh, interesting.
that's also he lives in Canada and I'm in Fort Worth, Texas.
Okay.
But about 70 emails later and about 6-7 months of development, I released the iOS version of A Dark Room, and
Oh,
then it ended up going viral. Hit the number one spot in April 13th, 2014 is was the day.
How established was it as a web-based game? Was it already kind of popular, or was it kind of an obscure game that you just happened to stumble upon at the time?
It was popular when it initially came out. It hit the front page of Hacker News. That's where I found out about it.
Okay.
Hacker News is just kind of like a developer. For those that don't know, it's a developer centric news feed site similar to Reddit that you
Okay.
would see. And it it was there, and I was like, hey, this is pretty cool. And I found it on there, and then 6-7 months later, it wasn't that popular anymore
Yeah.
because yeah, things
Yeah.
things become popular
Right.
and then they don't.
Right.
But yeah, it definitely had a lot of popularity, and that's how I was able to discover it myself.
So let's go back to you sell all your worldly possessions and you have a backpack with a laptop in it. Are you traveling around? Are you like seeing the world or seeing the United States? Where are you living with your
Well,
backpack and your computer?
so I still had an apartment, and the theme for the sabbatical and getting rid of those worldly possessions was this idea of just minimalism and just kind of remove the noise, remove anything that, I guess, for lack of a better term, polluted who who I who I was, or make you get attached to all the things
Sure.
that you own. So had an apartment, had clothes, had a desk, had furniture, but the backpack contained everything that I considered like I can't lose this backpack.
Okay.
So so and it kind of represented a restart or a reset for what I wanted to be and what I wanted to become.
Have you kept your life a minimalist, since 2014, or has
Nope, I bought stuff again.
you bought stuff again? Okay.
I bought stuff again. Well, and it was an interesting experience. It kind of resetting helped me understand what I did enjoy, and one of the things that I ended up really cherishing and valuing is time. And I think very few people value realize how important time is, and what the worth of 1 hour of a human life is.
Sure.
And We give it away for some hourly wage, but the total embodiment of a human life is worth so much. And I think about whenever I purchase something, or whenever I say, "Oh, I want this thing," I think in terms of time. How many hours is this going to take for me to get? And so that reset helped, and it distilled and clarified what I did value and what I didn't value. But yeah, I have stuff again.
All right. Well, very good. Now, you were saying you kind of got burnt out on the corporate world. It sounds like you might have been doing some sort of computer programming in the corporate world. What type of work were you doing?
I was a consultant, so I went from engagement to engagement.
Okay.
Their line of business applications you'll do. I worked at GameStop, so
Okay.
the price labels on the boxes, that was me.
All
So
right.
that was my claim to fame. I've worked on tax and accounting software, logistical software, basically the whole gambit of everything you can think of, from just line of business applications. And I really love the craft. Like I call it a craft programming, and um, it's it's really important to me. And just being surrounded by people that just treat it as a job, which is totally fine. Do your 9 to 5, go home and enjoy what you want. But
Right.
there was a disconnect, or a point of contention where I really loved what I did, but I was surrounded by people that didn't.
Right.
And that's where the burnout came in.
And are you doing game development full time now, or is that like a side job and you have a full-time job doing something else now?
I do indie game development for, I would say, full timeish for the past 6 7 years now.
Okay.
And I'll pick up contract work here and there, just to help, like, retirement and some of those other things. But yeah, my game dev stuff is still kicking, surprisingly.
Oh, excellent. Now, you saw a dark room on the Hacker magazine. Were
Mhm.
RPG resource management games, were those your type of games that you enjoyed playing, or like what caught your eye, particularly about that game?
The interesting thing was its minimalism. You open it up and it's just a single button that
Right.
you interact with, and the aesthetics and the visuals of the game, it's just plain text and is distilled down to its essence. And so it kind of like spoke to me. I was like, oh, hey, this is. I feel like I'm in the same point in my life right now. So I think that's what primarily drew me to the game, and the narrative elements were good. I like the phrasing of and the parsed sentence structure. Big fan of Cormac McCarthy's The Road,
Mhm.
which is where the phrasing was inspired from. So a lot of those components just kind of came together, and it, it's amazing how much luck is involved in any kind of windfall of success at times. And I think it was just right place, accidental time. And just came across it, and my mental state was aligned with what the game was presenting, and I wanted to
It
explore it
spoke
some
to you,
more.
right?
It spoke to me. Yep.
So for those, I think a lot of people, I mean, a dark room is a pretty popular game, particularly for the community that I represent, which are those who are blind and visually impaired. But for those who may not have played the game, well, why don't you just give a brief summary of what is a dark room?
Sure. It's a I call it a minimalist text-based RPG. So it starts off with some resource management, and then expands into roguelike elements, like you would see in the original game, the Rogue or Net Hack. And you're presented kind of like an ASCII map, and you get to explore and see the story unfold. And a lot of the narrative elements, that's kind of my contribution to the game. So Michael Townsend really emphasized the game mechanics for the gameplay, and I put it together in a good narrative bow, along with pacing updates and usability updates and whatnot. So I'd like to say, for those that have played the game, Michael created the world and I created the builder.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, there's kind of three unique things going on in that game. You have
Right.
kind of the resource management part, you have kind of the RPG world map, explore part, and then you have kind of this, I guess, you kind of have the story part where there's kind of a mystery that's unfolding, and you're trying to figure out where does your character play and is going on in this world that you're
Right.
interacting with. And, you know, and again, I don't want to give anything away, but it's just maybe not everything is what you think it is. And you kind of
Exactly.
discover that by the end. Um, so, you know, let's talk a little bit about accessibility.
Yeah,
A
definitely.
Dark Room is a fully accessible game. You know, to give you a little history from for me, A Dark Room is actually the very first blind accessible game that I played. So I went blind 3.5 years ago, and
Gotcha.
I, after a little bit of being blind, I kind of said, well, let me try to find a game to play. And I kept looking around, and I love RPGs, and one of the ones that kept coming up was A Dark Room, as you know, one of the games. Now, I will tell you, at first, when I first started the game, you know, it's kind of that minimalist, you know, one button, and it kind of, you know, the world opens up. At first, I just thought, I'm doing something wrong. You know, I'm not seeing what's on the screen. You know, there must be more here. So I got a little thrown at first because I was newly blind and I didn't know if I was doing something wrong and not understanding. But once I, you know, understood how the game worked and got it going, loved it. It really, for me, I was struggling with, are there going to be actually any game worth playing as a blind person?
Right.
And really wasn't sure I was going to find, you know, that game. And when I got to A Dark Room, played it and finished it, it really was like, yes, there are good games out there, and there's more than, you know, everybody who was telling me, you know, oh, do a text adventure game. Like, you know, I love a text adventure game, but you know, I want something more with more depth and more
Right.
agency. And A Dark Room showed me that that was really possible, and it also kind of set me on the path um, of, you know, starting the group that I've created, which is seeking out games across a wide variety of genres that have accessibility, so that everybody realizes that, you know, just about every game type is, you know, there is a game out there that's accessible in that field. So, you know, getting back to the question that I have, how did you find out that, you know, accessibility is a thing that you need to incorporate into your game?
Yeah, I was completely unaware of it when I first released. So I released the game, and it turns out that at that point I was using UIKit, or just the Apple baseline controls, and turns out they have fantastic kind of out of the box accessibility built in. So I actually received an email from someone, and they told me that they were having difficulty like traversing the ASCII map, and I got worried. I'm like, I tested the hell out of this. Like, I know this stuff works. I mean,
Right.
it's a bug. Now I'm panicking. Got to get a
Sure.
fix out. And he's like, no, no, no. Like I got to the dusty path, but the thing is, I'm blind, and the map doesn't make any sense to me.
Right.
And at that point, I was I was like, what? What do you mean?
Right.
And and that was that was a moment for me. It would I felt ignorant. I felt it was a lot of mixed feelings, and I wanted to do right by it, and I wanted to provide well, ramped up on the accessibility stuff that was in in the controls and what's built out of iOS, and I kind of researched and was like, you know what, I can probably do this. So that's when I took the time to really go through the game and fix it up to where it can be played um, without having to see. And yeah, but it was completely by accident. Someone just got all the way to a point where they just got to the map, and they it was just a bunch of like capital A's, comma, 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 capital T, and it didn't make any
Right.
sense. And then that's when they reached out to me.
Right. Well, that shows the importance of, you know, advocating for yourself and reaching out to people to, you know, and let them know, you know, and inform them that accessibility is something that, you know, we're seeking for in games.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
Now, one of the great accessibility features of your game, and I'm interested whether it already existed or if you added it specifically for accessibility, was when you get to the Dusty Road, which is kind of where you have a grid-like map where you can visit different locations and fight battles against enemies and things like that and do some exploring. There is a map legend that will tell you two squares to the north and three to the west is a cave, and five to the south and two to the east is a city, and it gives you this kind of relative points of interest indicator in that map legend, which is phenomenal for a blind person. I mean, for again, if I had to just swipe all the way through the map, I kind of would lose track of where I am versus where other things are. But that map legend really allowed me to understand where I was, what are the things I've seen, and how do I get back to them, or how do I move towards them if they've just been revealed out of the fog of exploration. So was that kind of relative map legend something that was already in the game, or was that something that you said a blind person needs to understand how to navigate, and if they don't have vision, I need to give them some points of reference?
Yeah, exactly. I built that out from scratch. So when that was kind of something that it goes back to that, that love for the craft and a love for building, games and software. Is this I wanted to do it right, and so I got the basic accessibility things in place, and then I enabled screen curtain, and I was like, if I can't play this, and if I can't complete it myself completely with the screen blank, then it's not good enough. And that's when I got to the map, and I was like, okay, I I'm lost on this map. How do I communicate? What's on there? How do I make it easy to get there with the magic taps, and how do I make all that navigation look good? And then the battles are still real time. That's one of my favorite parts of the game, is that I don't pull any punches as far as like the difficulty of the game. And all the battles are real time. They're just minor pauses in between to give you an option to hear like what damage was done, what progress you have.
Right.
And when you swipe back and forth through your weapons, you get a small pause that lets you get the status. But everything was real time, and I I had to do it that way because I didn't want to release something I couldn't beat myself
Right.
from that perspective. And so that's when I got on the map, I was lost the same way. And I just thought about, well, how would I convey what's on this map if you can't see it? And that's kind of where I went with the relative positioning, and getting back to the village and finding new locations, and um, uh, having pointers like, okay, the road is over here, which keeps you from getting into encounters. A lot of
Right.
those things were kind of just emerged from my own necessity of trying to beat the game with screen curtain on.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like the next step, right? A lot of people
Yeah.
say, all right, here's a grid, and I'll tell you, you're in column A, row 5, and you can kind of get that, but then you still have to kind of picture what the world is yourself. That relative map legend, as I call it, kind of paints the picture for you, and keeps track of everything for you, which was again just made that such a more enjoyable part than if it didn't have that relative map uh,
Yeah.
uh,
And I and
feature.
I and I think about, I mean, just the sheer amount of patience, that that y'all have to exercise. I didn't want to add more to it. Like, uh, I mean, I was just I had this screen curtain on, and I'm over here with immense frustration, and I couldn't do that. I needed to make it right.
Now, I think there is, if I'm not mistaken, I think there is one part of the game that is slightly different for the voiceover people, and I don't want to give it away, but at the end of the game, there's kind of
Right.
an escape sort of thing, or a thing that you had to um, do a little differently for voiceover users, people who had
Yes.
voiceover. And so, without or giving away only what you want to give away, why did that have to be a little bit different for us? Was it just programming wise too difficult to figure out how to make that accessible in a way other than what you did, which was kind of almost like a pseudo bypass of that part or that aspect of, of the game?
Right. So the last element of the game relied on kind of real time twitchy fingers, dodging things, kind of thing.
Right.
And at that point, in my head, with regards to the map and the resource gathering, it's easy to distill. There was a path to distilling something that was represented in 2 dimension into 1 dimension, and that's kind of how I think about it. So how do I represent this 2 dimensional view in 1 dimension of voice? And when it came to that last part where you're trying to do all this dodging, kind of like a arcade style a mechanic, I struggled with getting that distillation down, and I could have done it, but there was an aspect of, is it enjoyable? And I think towards the end, the coup de grace, or what I wanted to emphasize, was the storyline, was the closure with the builder, and the 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 narrative and storyline elements were the key piece there. So you still need the equipment to barrel through the kind of like brute force it without
Right.
having to dodge.
Right.
So the difficulty is different in that you're traversing the path much more to get the equipment that you need, so you can take those hits. But that was kind of the concession I had to make in that regard. And it's tricky. It really is difficult to uh, I was thinking about like spatial sound. Is there something that I could have done from that perspective? But at that point, it felt too gimmicky. I just felt like the intent is to communicate the story, is to communicate the ending, and I needed to position that last scene as kind of like a cutscene, a cutscene.
Right. Now you mentioned earlier, I think for coding this game and creating this game, you use kind of the native Apple software. Is that what you use to create a darkroom?
Yeah. So there's everything on iOS is built on UIKit, which is a suite of controls like buttons, text boxes, labels, and what have you. And a lot of those things have this baseline accessibility built in. So no sprites were used because it's a text-based game. So I was able to get away with just using the UIKit controls, which was pretty convenient. But that control suite is called UIKit, and that's part of iOS, and of course iOS has an accessibility initiative and accessibility department that wants to make sure their phones are accessible. So they have a lot of this nice stuff baked into these specific controls to make it a little bit easier to navigate. It's rough around the edges. It makes most apps usable, but yeah, effort has to be put in after the fact to really distill the experience down.
So you created a second game in this world. It's actually a prequel called The Ensign. Um,
Correct.
was that easier to execute because you kind of learned all about the accessibility as you struggled your way through getting a darkroom fully accessible, that things worked out pretty smoothly on the Ensign, or was there different challenges in kind of getting that game fully accessible?
Oh, definitely much easier, because I knew going in when I was building that game exactly what specific nuances to handle for. It's so weird, like a button fading in from opacity from 0 to 100% can break accessibility, and it's like some of these like subtle things, or your focus, if a button moves or focuses in, or a dialog box pops up, the focus can change. So there's some timing things they have to put in there to make sure that what what gets the highlight around the button is
Right.
the actual thing that you wanted to get. So I learned a lot of those things with the dark room, and it was just a matter of making sure that I put those things in with regards to the ensign. And the ensign was more emphasis on the map itself, and so brutally difficult. And an extension of the narrative, and kind of gives you originations on how you made it into a dark room.
Right.
And in that one, there's no spaceship sequence, so I didn't have to worry about that. There's a different ending for that game. But yeah, you get the work, you learn how to do it, and it's like it's ingrained in you, and it's just something that I think about when I build games now.
Yeah, and playing those two games, and tell me if you agree with me. I think you play, even though the Ensign is a prequel to a dark room, I think you play a dark room first,
Right. We call
because
it a pre-sequel.
Right, because it otherwise kind of a little bit of the mystery is ruined for you because you kind of understand why you're at the place of a dark room as opposed to
Right.
it being a mystery that unravels over the course of the game. The prequel kind of starts to spoil it a little bit. So I
Yeah.
don't think it would be as exciting to play a dark room. So I think you do a dark room first, then you do the Ensign.
Correct.
As
Right,
you put,
and it emphasizes the relationship of the builder and kind of her origins and yeah, how she got there and what was her role in this world. And so that connection with the builder in a dark room is what leads you to the ensign to try to understand more about who the builder was.
now over those two games, the Ensign and a dark room, what accessibility feature was the most difficult to get to work?
I think the biggest thing is with just the dynamic controls and how they move in and you know how the view changes. If the tricky part is to be cognizant about where there where a potential focus could be, and then if that disappears, where do you take it, and how do you let them know that something has changed? And so the dynamic aspect and the live aspect of something that's not static was really tricky. And the battles, trying to making sure that that was real time and getting that to work took took a little bit of a finesse to work out all the kinks. But yeah, I don't think Apple expected someone to do something to that extent with the accessibility stuffs, but um, you know, the
Well, that
polish is necessary.
yeah, I mean that's a very good point. So I can't remember if I mentioned this at the top of this interview, but a dark room was just featured in an article I wrote for PocketGamer.com about the 10 most influential mobile accessible games, and it's therefore being a resource manager RPG, kind of for that category of game. And I think what's really kind of unique is, accessibility is a big buzzword now and it's getting a lot of attention, but we're talking almost a decade ago that you put
Yeah,
out a dark room with a fully accessible RPG, map traversal, resource manager that, all works. I think that's why it's such a beloved game in the blind community because, it was when there was nothing for us to play, or if there was something, it was so surface level type of game. There's no depth to it. Here comes a dark room, a very rich, deep game that is fully accessible. I think that's particularly why it grew its attention in our particular community, and it's mentioned a lot when people are mentioning, what game should I play as a blind person. It sticks in people's minds as a really impactful experience because particularly at the time, as I said, there wasn't much for the blind community to play.
right.
Um, so again, do you feel like you were, on the cutting edge of accessibility compared to, peer set of games that were out there?
I I guess I just see it as, I mean, if I was blind and I mean I love gaming, like I grew up, it's it's my livelihood, it's my childhood, it's everything.
Yeah.
And I just aside from the cutting edge, I just wanted to do it right. And build a game the games that I can make accessible. I want to. And as far as what's available on the cutting edge, I know some enhancements I made. I mean, there are companies that do enhancements to make things colorblind or increase font size to help vision impaired and I think those are good simple changes that just expand and controllers that are accessible, and I think those are good steps in that direction. And it's tricky to talk about accessibility because it feels because it's the hot thing. It feels I hesitate because if I bring it up, then I feel it's tainted at that point that I'm talking about accessibility because everyone's going to think I'm talking about accessibility because it's the hot thing right now.
Right. Well, I
So
think, anyone who
I
would know
struggle
you,
with it.
yeah, I think anyone who would know your history knows that, you've been talking about it for 10 years and putting it into your game for 10 years. So, I mean, you're not
Right.
jumping on the bandwagon, if you will.
Right.
Um,
And so as far as the innovation, we have a long way to go. I mean, when I ported a Darkroom to the Nintendo Switch, and
oh,
there's no accessibility features in Nintendo Switch. It
right.
doesn't have them. But I'm looking at voice synthesis, and I'm looking at, okay, well, how how can I make something that isn't accessible? And there's no motivation for it outside of just wanting to do it. There's, it just it needs to happen. Like
Yeah.
from my
I've met
perspective.
so many developers and just talking to them. I mean, so many of them are doing it not because, oh, I'm doing it because it's going to get me more sales.
You
Most of the
just do it,
refrain is,
right?
yeah, I do it because I want gamers to be able to play game and I don't want to leave anybody out. And I think that's a real honorable, thought process. For a developer and accessibility and putting accessibility into your games, I mean, what could be made available to you to make it easier for you to add accessibility into the games? Is there different tool sets that you're missing that would just make it a lot easier? Or like what improvement for a developer would you suggest to make accessibility just easier?
I think a formalized, not necessarily even like a set of systems, but just a formalized way of what's the best way for someone to interact with a touch device or a controller. So Magic Tap was interesting. The approach of Magic Tap and the swipe to move, and the technique where you you use one hand to touch the screen, then you use your other hand to move around to feel for buttons,
Mhm.
and potentially have those things pop up. The thing is that there's a lot of fragmentation with regards to what is the protocol, what is the most efficient way to interact with a touch device or a game of any sort. And I think having some normalization or some consistency there, saying that this is the techniques you want to use. That foundation will allow frameworks to say we comply or to the specific technique.
Have
And
you have you come across the game accessibility guidelines that Ian Hamilton has put out?
I haven't.
So Ian Hamilton is a big accessibility advocate.
Mhm.
He started the Game Accessibility Conference, which is at the end of October, the 24th and 25th.
Okay.
And he put out a set of guides. I haven't read the guides because I don't know anything about coding, so I'm not sure it would mean much to me. But he put out a thing called the Game Accessibility Guidelines, which is kind of a best practices of, when you're creating an accessible game, here's things that you need to think about and consider. Um, so that, if you haven't seen that resource, it might be worth pulling it up and seeing if it helps at all.
Definitely. Um, but yeah, I think across the board, having that kind of standardization, and some so I'm not going in knowing nothing about the environment. I think that was the biggest barrier to entry was I don't know what screen curtain is. I don't know
Right.
what magic tap is. I don't know the swipe mechanics. I don't know how to iterate through a sentence or a word. These are things that I had to like kind of figure out. How do I interrupt the voice synthesis? How do I wait for it to complete before trying again? All those nuances. How fast should it be? Um, how should the phrasing and the sentences and the dialogue be changed to allow for the right pauses at the right points to make it sound more human?
Right.
Um, yeah, so a lot of those like little subtleties is just you just kind of have to hack it together until it feels right. And I think that barrier to entry hurts at times.
Yeah, and I think about this too is, there's as you were kind of saying, navigating around by, word or character if you need be in certain games. Some people may not realize there's the whole like rotary menu where you can kind of
Right.
switch that. That's slightly more advanced. I think it's a little bit above the average user. So it's how do you let people know that that's something that is out there that can help you navigate this game, or just make it easier if you didn't hear something or you want to reread something. those are things I think about where I'm playing a game. I'm like, I'm getting around this game, but I know about a lot of these, go in the rotary, change it to word or character
Right.
or headers or links, and it just makes it quicker for me to navigate through. And that's actually some of those things. I've played some games that um, the one I think about is a game called Universal Paperclips, where there's so much data on the screen that if you're doing something at the top of the screen, it might be 100 swipes to get to something at the bottom of the screen, which is
Oh
just
man,
so like, oh my gosh, now I got 100 swipes there and then 100 swipes back, and it's like, could you just put
it's
some headers?
painful.
Yeah, put some headers or some something that make me jump sections on this. It's just painful, and I don't think it would be much. I mean, there were headers, they just weren't labeled as headers. There was a section that said, whatever, processing, and then here's your things that you can do under processing. They just didn't make processing a header. So,
Right. Oh, it's
it's,
so painful.
yeah. So those are things that, again, I wish, someone had reached out to them and just like, please, break this up into sections or put it into tabs or something, to not put it all on one screen. Again, from a visual standpoint, super easy to maybe scroll and see and move around, but
Right.
when you're blind, you have to swipe through every single element. It gets a little painful. So if you could lift the curtain a little bit. Again, we have a lot of people who are video game players as opposed to people who create video games who will be watching this. When you're creating something like a dark room, um, it looks, it all works. So it seems like, maybe this isn't so hard, but I mean, imagine there's so much coding behind every little aspect, and even doing the most simplest of things can be, maybe dozens or hundreds of lines of code. So like, what does it take to create a game? You have an idea, and to actually code that, can you give people kind of a high level, what does it take to create a game?
Yeah, it's so the tricky part is always the feedback loop, and the it's from getting writing some code on the in your code editor and seeing it in action. And the challenge there is that that feedback loop is is very long, in that you don't have the immediate tactile response. It doesn't update immediately. Like you draw on a piece of paper, the lead gets on the paper, and you see the shading, all that in real time. So a lot of the challenges in game development is living in this living in this abstract headspace for a greater portion of your development cycle. And frankly, I don't think our brains were designed to live in that abstract world, the way developers have to kind of be there. And that's the most difficult part, because you have this idea of in your head of what this game can look like, or what you think is a fun component, but to get it on paper or in your editor, to get it to compile, to get it to show up on the screen, and to try it to see if it works, that it's a lot. It's a lot to invest in, to find that it didn't work, or it wasn't fun, or it wasn't interesting. And that so you just get better at thinking in the abstract, and visualizing those things in your head before getting it on paper. But it's taxing. It really tires you out.
So before I went blind, I dabbled in, for fun, just for fun, making a
Hmm.
game in Twine. Do you know Twine?
Yep.
Okay. So for those who don't know, Twine is a program that you can create kind of a text adventure, multiple path type of game. If you're kind of good at it, which I was decent at it, you could create kind of RPG kind of mechanics and things like that in it as well. And the two things that I found really, really difficult was, first off, um, when you thought of something new, like, ooh, I want to add in this mechanic or this new feature, if you were already like created a whole bunch of the game, trying to fit something in that you didn't think of
Yes.
from the beginning was a nightmare of all the things that you had to touch and
All
rework.
the branches you have to remove and
Right,
rewire to try to. Oh, it's
right.
painful. Yes.
So I found that really difficult. And then as I got it, mine was kind of a branching story, go here, meet this person. And now that you've met this person, now you can, get opens up this location, or you allows you to find something at this other location. So there was a lot of dependence, if you will, as you got further down in the game. If you had talked to this person and made this decision, then you have this choice available to you further down the game. And it eventually just got so hard to test something new, because it was
Right.
like, all right, I've got to play through the whole game and do all these different iterations to know whether this is working properly, or did it break and not pop the way that I wanted it to. And that was just like overwhelming as just a solo person who was, and I wasn't, too far into the game. I would still say it was at the beginning stages of ultimately what my vision was for that game, and it was already becoming so overwhelming to, just make sure everything was working at the later stages of the game. Did you have any of that struggle with, the Ensign or a dark room
Oh,
of
definitely.
testing? Yeah.
Yeah, you like just the example that you gave with Twine, you've got this like variable that stores whether you visited that person or not,
Yeah.
and then you somehow go through some branch and the bug is there. It's like, wait, I haven't seen that person yet, but for some reason this thing is true when it shouldn't be.
Right. Yeah.
And to mentally unpack that in your head and walk through it and read through it and try to keep all that information across time
Right.
in your head it's challenge. It really is challenging.
And finding
And
where did it flip to true when I didn't mean it to, where is
right,
that it buried in this code where I, made a mistake or copied and
yeah,
pasted something that I shouldn't have done. And,
yeah.
yeah.
A famous sentence that all developers say, that's not possible. That's not possible. And and it's and I still say it's like that's how's that possible? That's not possible. And the fun of it is that you figure it out and you're like, okay, I get the world makes sense again because it is ones and zeros and it's deterministic. But I still say it. It's like that's not possible. There's no way that this can happen. It always happens.
Yeah. Or
Um,
you're missing a
but
comma or a bracket that changes the,
yes,
whether something trips. Yeah, I mean, so I was a novice. I had no computer programming background. I just, started doing it for fun. Um, and so I always had the assumption is I did something wrong. I don't know what I'm doing, so it must be that I screwed something up. I at least came to it with that. I never said this is impossible. I just said, what did I do wrong now?
the computer all does exactly what you tell it to, and
Right,
that's the unfortunate part. It's
right.
like do what I meant, not what I said. Yeah, it's still that challenge is still there. I guess I've been doing it for over 25 years, 22 years now. So you get better at it, with practice. And it gets for a dark room in the Ensign, I've got automated scripts that will kind of predefine a map, so at least it can run through the game by itself without me having to play it. But RNG, changes that. So I know that that specific map and that specific battle sequence and that specific set of events works. So it catches the easier bugs. But I've had situations where I've generated maps where you can't reach the end goal because it's too far away and you die of starvation or something before you even
I
get
see.
to it.
Well, that's interesting. I don't think I
Yeah.
realized that, or maybe just never really paid. I played a dark room a couple of times, but I don't think
Mhm.
you know, I think it was far enough in between that I didn't notice whether the Dusty Road was a different map from one to the other. But so you're telling me that's a randomly generated map?
Yep, it's randomly generated every
Oh, I
time.
did not. Yeah, I did not realize that.
Yep.
So that's interesting. So that makes it even more reason to come back because, as you said, yes, kind of, you know, you won't know exactly where to go to find what you need to find because it's
Right.
somewhere different on the map. That's great. Um, so you have a dark room in the Ensign, and this is something that I'm talking to a lot of developers, and I never really thought about is I thought, you create a game 13 or 10 years ago and you put it out and you wash your hands and you're done and you rake in your money that when people download it, but there's kind of a constant maintenance of these games that you have
There
to
is.
kind of
Yeah.
keep up with. So, tell people a little bit about why there is a constant maintenance of a game.
Right. So I call it Apple Christmas. And anytime I used to love Apple Christmas. Now I don't like Apple Christmas so much because they'll release a new device. I'm like, please tell me they didn't change the resolution, or please tell me that, this one quirk doesn't show up again, or please tell me they didn't change the controls. So there's a constant maintenance, that just upkeep and making sure that everything continues to work with every update of the OS. I've had behavioral changes in even accessibility between different OS versions. Specifically, I think it was iOS 13. Yeah, horrible reworks had to be done because of how they changed how animations happen for pop-ups. But but that upkeep is still there, and that's that's the frustrating part of having to always go back to it. But the nice part is that I love going back to them and just tweaking something. It's like, oh, because more now. Like I know more about game development and design and narrative, so it's like, oh, I hate how I did that part. Let me make it a little better. And no one's gonna play it. Like a part of me is like, no one's gonna replay it, but I still want to do it because it's
Well,
you just want to.
yeah, I mean, and how do you, as a developer and business person, if you will, you know, the Dark Room's been out for 10 years. I don't know how many downloads it gets, in the year 2022 versus what it got in 2014. But I mean, do you say, all right, they've broken so much, and let me just let this game sunset and let me, put it to bed and let me move on to, whatever the builder, the next game I'm going to create. Do you ever think that way, or do you just it's something that you created and you just want it always to be out there, so you'll go in and you'll do the maintenance, and if it makes one download, that's good enough?
Yeah, I think I definitely take the approach of doing the maintenance and keeping it up to date, and primarily because to understand the patterns in that maintenance cycle, so I can optimize it. So every time I have to do the maintenance on it, I make it easier on myself. So first time I was like, oh, I got to manually test this thing. I did it again. It's like, oh crap, I'm still manually testing it. Can I get the first part of it working and automated? So that iteration and that optimization, it streamlines it to where I can sustainably create new games, and
Does it teach
just
you
keep
how
doing that.
to maybe, like, again, let's making up a game, I'm calling it the builder as your next
Right.
game. So I'm creating the builder now, and now I understand how maintenance updates happen. Is there things that you can do to prevent having to maintain your game? Because if you build it a
Definitely.
certain way from the beginning, updates really won't affect it.
Yes, absolutely. So like a couple of things that I would put in there as far as one thing, don't use the Apple's controls anymore. That's something that I actually reworked in a lot of my games. So I've constructed my own specifically defined accessibility controls, and I just don't take a dependency on Apple stuff anymore. So I don't worry about their things changing. Regionalization was another thing. When the Nintendo Switch version came out, I had a handle for both English and Japanese. Well, now that's something that I'll do up front. I know that's going to be coming, so that changes how I do my narrative, how where I write it, how do I prepare these things for translations to occur, and a lot of it's that iteration and not giving up on these properties that gave me the insights to say, here's how I make this better and make this faster and make it sustainable. So yeah, you learn things every time, and then when I start a new project, that that whole that whole mental stack comes in before I start coding.
So you have a Dark Room, you have an Ensign that came out a few years after that. I mean, do you
Right.
have another game that I'm not aware of that's come out between the Ensign and today, or you have a game in mind that you're working on? What's kind of the next thing for you,
So
the
the
development thing?
after that I did it was a rhythm based uh 2D platformer narrative called A Noble Circle,
Okay.
and difficult. It had the same difficulties as the last part of a dark room, and that was one of the things where I was like, I can't do much as far as making this enjoyable from an
Oh,
accessible
accessibility.
standpoint.
Okay.
There's another game I have called Mildly Interesting RTS, which is a real time strategy game, and
Yeah,
it's called I say Mertz for short,
yeah.
and it says what it is on the bug. It's mildly interesting. It's a mildly interesting RTS, and after I got the initial release out, it has those like real time elements, but I started looking at the topologies that I put on the map. for the maps as far as where you traverse things. And I found that I can normalize a lot of these things to where it can be accessible. So that's one of the titles that I want to revisit and be like, I can make this work, kind of in a real time fashion, and give the good feel good feelings of playing an RTS like StarCraft or Warcraft or Total Annihilation or any of the other awesome games out there. So I have
Yeah, that's an
Milo's.
interesting one.
Mhm.
Real-time strategy games, particularly for accessibility standpoint, is you have to make it in a way that we can move fast enough to keep up with the real time aspect of things, that things don't move,
Right.
that we can't respond fast enough to that. So a lot of real time strategy games are really, really difficult or take us a lot longer to complete because we just can't do it, move
Right.
fast enough to do it. Having real compact design. There was a game that again made it on that list of great accessible games called A Few Minutes to Glory, um, which it had a really compact aspect of navigating the stuff that you needed to do in a real time strategy
Mhm.
in the time limit. So that compact design, or being able to move, whether it be with headers or other features that you can move quickly through the things that you want someone to do in that real time, will be really important to there. Or as you said, kind of leave a little extra pause if you're using voiceover, stretch
Right.
it out a little bit to give us the time to get to where we need to go.
Yeah. And I think it'd be really receptive to that. So Mildly Interesting RTS is another game out there.
Is that
I
on
spent
Apple?
it's on Apple right now. It's not accessible at this point though. Um, so we have a Dark Room, the Ensign, a Noble Circle, Mildly Interesting RTS. Then I ported a Dark Room to Android, and then ADR to Nintendo Switch, and now I'm dealing with okay upkeep across three systems,
Yeah.
and these were lessons that I learned, and I've been trying to optimize on that. So when I got to the Nintendo Switch, I put a hold on kind of new development, and I said, okay, I need to reset in such a way to where I can keep my sustainability, because this being a mostly solo person, I'll collaborate with people and I'll contract out for maybe assets if needed, but uh, I do the brunt of the work. And I'm at 6 games now, and there's no way that I can you know do the iOS port, then do the Android, then Switch. So I took the last 3 years now, kind of codifying all that into a game engine. So that's kind of where my time has been spent for, yeah,
Well, yeah,
for recently.
yeah, that was a really, like I said, the interesting thing I found out from talking to developers is, you get to a point, I think it's with a solo developer, it's somewhere between 4 and 6, where the maintenance, just keeping all those games going, kind of doesn't leave room for new development,
Right.
unless you let something sunset or you expand your team. Um,
Right.
and both of those are have their challenges and difficulties. So
Right.
um, do you ever randomly sit there and it's whatever, September 2022, and suddenly a dark room has way more downloads than you've seen in a while, and wonder, like, why did that happen?
um there are spikes here and there, and I when it went viral in the UK, I obsessed over that, and then when it went viral in the US, that was an additional obsession. It was there for 22 days. I didn't sleep for 22 days. I mean, I just there's no my mental state was, I felt like I was in Beautiful Mind, where I'm just this crazy person trying to connect dots of unrelated events to try to understand how this thing happened. And it, I I I gave up. I don't want to go back. So if it spikes, I'm like, great, good job, ADR. And then I just kind of leave it at that, and just it's a serendipitous, lady luck kind of moment, and I don't dwell on it.
Well, I'm hoping in September 2022, you see a spike, because I wrote that article for PocketGamer.
Awesome.
So hopefully you get a lot of people downloading it. That's my hope for you. Uh, so when you are kind of thinking about advice for someone who might be developing in the future, who, a new developer. I mean, what would you say to them is, this is the one major piece of advice I would give you about ensuring that accessibility is into your game?
I think I think the most important thing is start with the low hanging fruit, um, colorblind, font size. I mean, these are just very straightforward things that you can apply to your game, and then try to empathize with people. I mean, my eyesight, like when I built a dark room, I had 20/20 vision. It was great, and now I have astigmatism. I'm exhausted. I'm older, and like I need things to be larger, it and I'll play games on the console, and the dialogue and the subtitles for a first person shooter I'm playing is so tiny, or the option screen is so tiny. I'm like, I can't see this damn thing. Um, and so I think building up that empathy and just understanding that, I mean, I love games. I mean, they're 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 wonderful. They're a beautiful work of art, and I can't imagine a world without them. And so imagine a world without them, and having them and then not having them, and how does that feel? And I think at that point, that was the kind of motivator. So start with the low hanging fruit, work through that. You're just starting off. You're not going to have all the chops you need, but build that empathy over time and expand out, and always keep that in mind, because you never know when you're going to be in that same spot. You It's like a today you, tomorrow me. So you just don't know, and just realize that.
Yeah, vision impairment is one of those disabilities that if you live long enough, everyone's going to join the club.
Right.
No one keeps 20/20 vision till to 80 years old. Everybody starts, having diminished the vision. So, again, you'll if you're not there, you'll probably eventually be there. So, it's
Yeah.
nice to consider those who are already there. Um, if we take a second to just talk about the business side of things,
Sure.
um, so you create a dark room, or you create the Ensign, or you create any of these other games. How do you think about monetization? Like, how do you say, this is a $2.99 worth game, or a $5.99 worth game, or if I set it for $5.99, I might not get as many downloads, so maybe I should set it for $3.99. How do you figure that out?
Right. So for me, what as far as my wheelhouse and where I found the most success is hyper niche experiences. So the idea there is that I'm not going for the generic Candy Crush kind of experience. I'm going for a very, very specific, trying to target a very, very specific group of people. An example is I'm working on a racing game right now. It's a drifting game, and it's based off of an anime called Initial D. So for those that have that know about Initial D, they're like, "OMG, I want a game based on Initial D." They immediately gravitate to it, but most people don't know what it is, and that's totally fine. And the beauty of building specific experiences like that is that they're so hyper focused that it's unlikely that those communities and those groups have anything that hits the spot for them. So and from that perspective, the upfront cost for the game is something that kind of builds out with my interactions with those communities. So I'll my primary avenue is subreddits. So I'll go to a specific subreddit that I myself am obsessed and interested with, and I build that relationship with those community members. Talk about the game I'm building. Do demos. Give freebies and things like that, just so they know I'm a human being and I'm just like them, and I want to build a game about this specific niche because I think it should exist. And then after that, that's when I transition into the monetization aspect of it. And by that point, they know who I am. They're more than happy to support me from that perspective. And that's kind of how I deal with the monetization. And I'm a gamer. I have a gut feel of like, hey, is this worth X number of dollars or Y number of dollars?
Okay.
And I just kind of put that dollar amount on there. And the value prop there is that none of my none of my titles after, aside from a dark room, which is like an anomaly in its entirety, they all make small amounts of money. But if I have 20 games and each one makes, $200 a month or $100 a month, that times 20 is a lot of money.
Right.
It is. And for those developers that are starting off, they're like, oh, you're only making $100 a month, or you're only making only $200 a month. I'm like, that's internet. That's my internet connection for life.
Right.
Right. That pays for that. Or you hit 300, you're like, that's a car payment for life. You never have to worry about a car payment. And with these hyper niche offerings, they have this long tail because there are always going to be new people discovering, Initial D, or discovering mechanical keyboard building, or underwater basket weaving, or some other really, really niche hobby, and they will love a game that caters to that audience. So, and the other thing is that the big AAA companies aren't going to go after these types of communities because it's not profitable for them. It's not worth the money.
Right.
So from a competition standpoint, it
You might be
puts
the
me
only
in.
game in town.
I'm the only game in town, right? So that's how I've survived.
So when you think about all the games, Dark Room and Ensign, mildly interesting RTS, all these different games, I mean, what would you say you're most proud of over that, developer experience? What do you look back on what you've done and said, this is the thing that I'm most excited about of what I've accomplished?
Yeah. As any artist, I'm like, I hate all my work. It's all terrible. But I don't think I've built my air quotes magnum opus yet. That's still out there to be created. I think a noble circle is probably my best narrative piece that I've done. If I had to choose one, it'd probably be a Noble Circle. And Noble Circle is based off of Flatland: Romance of Many Dimensions, which is a satirical novella based in the time frame of Versailles. So it talked about these two-dimensional shapes and their mannerisms and how they moved around, and how each shape interacted with society. And it was just a satire of the crazy stuff that happened in Versailles during that period. And it was written by a mathematician. There's like these really cool, like very crunchy details of information of math and geometry. And I re-envisioned that game, and I built an experience that was a satire of the 21st century. What does that look like? How would that end up playing out as a specific narrative? So that would probably be my strongest narrative piece that I've done, and that would be the one thing that I'm most proud of. And the other tricky part is a dark room. It's bittersweet. Like it has this notoriety, and at times I feel like it's not mine. Like, oh, Michael made the game, and I just, and I even even though I added all these pacing elements and all this narrative and beautiful story and this attachment and the presentation, I felt like it wasn't mine. And the interesting is that Michael feels the same way. He's like, well, I don't feel like it's mine either, because it was your game that made it to the #1 spot. I got $100 in donations from what I built. And when it was forgotten in 3 weeks, it was your game that got remembered. And so both of us have like
a little imposter syndrome.
Yeah, imposter syndrome, and both of us are. It's neither one of ours, and it's a very, very strange feeling.
Yeah,
so am I proud of the success? Yeah. Is it mine to be proud of? I don't think so. Maybe. I don't know. But if you asked Michael the same thing, he'd say the same thing. And so it's in this state where it just exists, and we both try very hard to get out from under its shadow. But of course, for both of us, it's been the most successful game that we collaborate on.
Right.
And it's tricky. It's always tricky. So I'm still waiting for that magnum opus that gets me out from under that shadow. And it is what it is.
Well, I will tell you. I mean, whether it's yours or Michael's or both of yours, you want to look at it that way. A phenomenal game, just as a game unto itself.
Appreciate it.
And then again, the accessibility just allows for, just flawless play. Again, I feel like I had an uninterrupted experience where I did not feel that my vision impairment was holding me back from playing and enjoying that game, other than right at the beginning where I just didn't understand and I thought it was, why is there only one button? I must be.
Everyone says that.
So
what is this crap?
I must be doing something wrong. There must be more elements on this, but that was just me not understanding my blindness, because it was only a month or two after I went blind that I picked it up. But a fabulous game, and I really appreciate all the effort that you've put in taking the mantle when someone asked you about accessibility, to going through the efforts of putting on the screen curtain and trying to play the game to the end, and really thinking through, how do I make this a good game, from pacing and from understanding and sharing of information, to make this game a successful game for those who are playing as a blind or visually impaired person. So, I mean, really kudos to you. Thank you for doing it. Thank you for, making a great game accessible to our community. For those, again, please check out A Dark Room, play it first, then go to the Ensign. We'll keep our eyes out for, any other games that you put out that become accessible. You're always welcome to post to the Facebook group, any updates that you have on your games around accessibility. We would love to hear about the things that you're getting up to, because obviously you're very skilled at putting out accessible games. So we appreciate that.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, Amir, thank you.
I really do. It really does.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. And thanks for coming out to the interview series. We really appreciate it. And we hope to have you back again one day.
All right. Take care.